Je voudrais faire quelques remarques sur la façon dont j'ai conduit ce travail.
I'd like to tell you about the way I conducted this work. I knew about the new law opening up marriage for same-sex couples. I knew the arguments of opposants in France, arguments that were exposed in a very noisy way sometimes in the streets, in the newspapers, in the National Assembly. So I knew those opposition arguments to this new law. The Polynesian society had remained very silent, even though I knew the positions, the official positions, public positions of senators and deputies of this country. So I wanted to go and meet the population and to hear what was said, what was understood, and that's why I wanted to listen to the objections, the fears, the misunderstandings, and the critiques, the criticisms for this new law, and also sometimes by the law about PACS. And I listened to a great number of people. I listened to men and male and female homosexuals. I listened to some Mahu and Rere, and I listened also what the church representatives had to say, and particularly the two main churches, Protestant and Catholic. And I also heard people who belong to other religions. But I have to say that circumstances didn't allow me to meet people belonging to the Sanito religion. And so yesterday I was very happy to hear John Murray and to learn a few things about this religion. So this was my way of working. And the article is very long, but I'm going to summarize it to try not to go over time. The conception of the family and parenthood structures always reveal the links and the logics that link the individual with the family group in his or her society, in his culture at a given time of its history. So family, sexual identity, the notion of couple, the different ways in which couples live their lives, the different sexualities, all these questions cannot be apprehended, can only be apprehended according to a culture in a moment in time, in its history. So to understand the resistance of Polynesian society against this law, for the PACS, and also the law allowing same-sex marriage, there has to be a reference to Polynesian culture before the arrival of Europeans and after the arrival of Europeans. And so I presented my work starting from the idea that this new law that is called marriage for all reveal this demand for legitimacy and judicial recognition and legal consecration of the homosexual community in metropolitan France and in other European countries. And so it was all about, for them, to join the legal norm. So I constructed my work on the basis of a reflection on this legal norm, but also, of course, in relationship with the cultural norm and the religious norm and the religious interdicts. And all rights come from the sky, and the civil rights also come from the sky, so from heaven. So there are relationships between these different norms. The law of 1999 about the Civil Pact for Solidarity, le PACS, has never been applied in Polynesia. but the law for same-sex marriage is applicable fully, automatically in Polynesia. So what are the judicial reasons that it would explain this paradoxical situation of a country in which le Pax never existed, but where today marriage is possible for same-sex couple? The judicial reasons are simple. The Pax is a contract, a civil contract. That's its judicial nature that determines the fact that it is the competence of the country. So it exclusively belongs to the territorial assembly to choose to apply the Pax law or not. It is not part of the state of the persons, but marriage does. And so this is a competence of the state. This is why the law for same-sex couple, for marriage, is applicable fully. These are the judicial reasons. But beyond that, we're more interested in, I was more interested in the reason for opposing this law, whether it was the recognition, the consecration of a same-sex couple in a pax or in marriage. So I'd just like to remind you quickly that that Polynesia is French, hasn't been French for very long. So in just a few lines, it's only in the middle of the 18th century that the first contacts happened between the West and Polynesian society when Samuel Wallis arrived in Tahiti in 1767. He is, of course, followed by other navigators, Bougainville, Cook, etc., who all wrote about their travels, describing the society that they're discovering and that is so different from their own. Then the missionaries arrived, bringing the gospel to these people of Oceania. Then there was the period of French colonization. It's in 1866 that the Tahitian Legislative Assembly votes for the introduction of the French legislation. And it's in 1877 that King Pomare V makes a gift of these islands to France. So it's very recent. And that explains why the original culture, traditional culture of Polynesia is still very much alive and present in the way of understanding the laws or not understanding the laws that come from metropolitan France. French law, what I heard, which is quite common, is that the French laws are always more or less colored as something strange or even foreign, and they are not understood when they do not match the subjectivity of Polynesian people or the normative landmarks of their cultures. This incomprehension I had already treated in 1992 with this article called "The Application of Family Law in Polynesia." But this difficulty of apprehending French law, we find it again in family law and the laws regarding the land. So the law concerning, let's see about incomprehension. The law that allows same-sex marriages, as we said earlier, is formulated by communicants. This formulation is not in the law, but it's a shortcut. But this way of calling it was a source in metropolitan France and Polynesia of many misunderstandings. And I have explained several times, I had to explain that no, the interdictions of marriages were not suppressed. It's not exactly marriage for all, because in the civil code, in spite of the new law, there still exist interdictions of marriages between an aunt and her niece today, or between an uncle and his nephew. And also the marriage of minors is still, in principle, forbidden, with possible exceptions. So if we look at the sexuality and what are the foundations of the domain of the norm in French Polynesia? Well, we discover that there is a different story of sexuality, another story of homosexuality, another place given to the difference between the sexes. And of course, I cannot develop what I do in this article in more detail. Homosexuality was practiced, of course, before the arrival of Europeans, and it's interesting to see that to see how it was lived, to see how it was practiced between men and between women. And marriage did exist before the arrival of Europeans. So it had a special place, but it did exist. So whether it's before or before the arrival of the Europeans or today, we see that the norm is of free unions. There are many more couples in free union than married couples today. Now, of course, churches today encourage the faithful to get married. And I'm telling this because I've often heard and felt that these differences in status between a married couple or a free union couple, and again, the difference between a homosexual couple and a heterosexual couple, they are not lived as discriminatory. And all the equality breaks are not perceived as unjust. These differences in status, very often, I understood that they were not lived as constitutive of a discrimination, of an unjust discrimination. And this drove me to think about equality, the notion of equality as it is conceived here, and how it's conceived in France today. Because this great notion of equality has has made it possible for this new law to be adopted. So the normative horizon of Polynesians is also determined by this human and social reality of which we've heard so much recently, and which is constituted by the third sex, if we want to use this expression, transsexualism, or rather this porous border between the sexes. And so the constitution of the identity of the Mahu, the Rere, is made today, still, and thankfully, by family and social recognition. In Polynesian society, they can be conceived in the eyes of others, and this look is very often benevolent, and it's a source of self-respect and self-esteem. But in terms of sexuality, self-esteem is fundamental. If homosexual marriage is a democratic ideal, at first we can think that it is self-esteem for everyone that constitutes a democratic ideal. Today, it's the condition of prostitutes of the Rere, which is a source of great worry for these people, of profound and silent suffering that isolates them and sometimes drives them to the doors of despair. But of course, in my article, I was able to develop all the distinctions between Mahu and Rere. But Why, in this context of sexual pluralism in Polynesia, why is the question of legal recognition of a status for same-sex couples, why does it seem superfluous, useless? It's often what I've been told, at least for part of the population. Well, homosexual couples do not have, and particularly this category of population, the Mahu or the Rere, don't have to fight against a lack of recognition. Their history is completely different from that of the West. They live, or they inhabit a zone of legitimacy that does not reduce them to their sexual orientation, or not even to a community, even though yesterday we talked about the Rere community. And I can conceive that it's okay to use this term. But they belong to a social margin, but it's a social margin that is recognized. And then the notion of individual freedom in this domain of sexuality, which is invoked very often, and in the name of this freedom, which is part of the private domain, that seems to prevail on the notion of equality. Well, this notion of freedom is precisely seemed to win over the notion of equality, to prevail over it. So the distinction between the private and the public, and the fact that sexuality and homosexuality must remain in the private domain, we can see an influence here from the churches. If we refer to the way homosexuality was lived before the arrival of the missionaries, maybe we can see an influence of the church. But in any case, the consequences are that there is... it's not a problem that sexual belonging should become a public affair. There's no need for homosexuality to become a judicial notion. So sometimes that's what I've been told. And I would even say that for Mahu and the Rere, same-sex marriage seems to represent sometimes a danger of destabilization of a traditional symbolic system, which is constitutive of rules of collective life and the cultural order. So homosexual marriage engenders, in a way, in some minds, for some people, a problem for tradition, and the way norms is fabricated and inserted in a space of common meaning. We have to wonder what is the speech, the look, the influence of churches in Polynesian society of yesterday and today. The arrival of the missionaries has modified the social structures, family, religious structures of Polynesian society. Culture, traditional culture, was religious in essence. Sexuality was lived in with a certain freedom, joy, innocence, and homosexuality was a component of this sexual freedom, which represented a value of common existence for the Polynesian people. So sexuality is seen as a joyful activity before the arrival of the Europeans, and a playful and healthy activity, also has a sacred character. also has a sacred character in that it is integrated to the representation of the cosmos. The missionaries have a mission of civilization, and civilization is Western culture and the Christian conception of marriage. And so, the first missionaries, Methodists, Lutheran, Calvinists, strictly followed the Old Testament and defended the Jewish values of monogamic marriage and the interdicts of Leviticus concerning nudity, incest, homosexuality, sodomy, sexual relationships during religious festivals and when women had their periods, and all sexual practices that cannot bring forth a child. And so the missionaries institute, in a way, the sacrifice of sexual freedom in the name of other normative justifications, in the name of other judgment of values. And we talked about it yesterday. Baptism was refused to King Pomare II for a while because of his homosexual practices. And the missionaries would refuse to baptize him. And then marriage, it was decided that marriage could only be celebrated by a missionary. Today, Polynesia is a Christianized country, and the integration of monotheistic religions in Polynesian culture sometimes translates as an ultra-orthodox view of these religions. Olivier Roy, in his book The Holy Ignorance, writes, Tahitian evangelism is a lot more fundamentalist than Protestant trends in metropolitan France. So I would like to say about marriage and about homosexuality, the representatives of the Church, of the Catholic Church that I have met, because they particularly told me about this aspect of things, they have a tendency to consider the sexual orientation as a determinism of nature. And having said that, this conception according to which homosexual preference is not a free choice, not any more than a heterosexual preference, removes any notion of sin, even though the Church sometimes operates a difference between attraction and fully lived sexuality. So this respect of differences exists in the two main religions, and homosexuality is tolerated as a social reality that must be protected against any form of exclusion or racism. You do not find in Polynesia, in French Polynesia today, there's no religious extremism against homosexuality. And I'm going to have to go a lot quicker. The notion of a same-sex couple regarding the foundation of the family, I have studied marriage in the Christian conception, the marriage in the civil code, of course, at the non-religious conception of marriage, and marriage before the arrival of the Europeans in traditional Polynesian society. So, and what the result today is that marriage is considered by churches legitimately as a sacrament, and that nearly all churches wish that this sacrament be reserved to heterosexual couples. A priest was telling me, so if we use the word marriage and it's open to all, we would need a different word to talk about a sacrament that would be reserved for couples that wish to get married, for heterosexual couples. About sexual otherness, which is the foundation of the sacrament of marriage, because this sexual otherness is linked to procreation. Sexual otherness was not recognized by the Constitutional Council as a principle, as a fundamental principles of the laws of the Republic. And today, law dissociates marriage from procreation. Since the arrival of contraception, but especially since the laws of 1984 about bioethics, this dissociation exists in the law. So I would say, in conclusion, affective asexual parenthood, which is today allowed, since this law that allows same-sex marriage does not only mention marriage, but also talks about questions, very important and more delicate questions, which are the questions of the right to become a parent. And this right is given by the law to same-sex couples. They are allowed to adopt a child. Whether it's a simple or a full adoption. So very quickly we'll have the question of medically assisted procreation and surrogate mothers for same-sex couples. But in that case, the Polynesian population, from what I've heard, it was very interesting because it was not the same arguments that were used in metropolitan France. As soon as we talked about parenthood, the fact that you become parents outside of all biological reality, that is something that exists already in Polynesian culture. And French law of filiation is applied in Polynesia, but Polynesian society has a conception of parenthood that is completely different from that of the West. And today still gives to biological truth a secondary place. I'm saying secondary. The biological truth is never hidden. Never hidden. And so this tradition of adoption in Polynesia, this tradition of the fa'amu child, of the circulation of children throughout the extended family or even outside the family, which makes it possible to conceive parenthood without any biological foundation. And today the place that is given to elective parenthood is very important. But it doesn't allow lies or silence about the biological origins, the biological truth of the origin of children and their biological families. In Polynesia, there is a coexistence of two families, the one that gave life and the one that raises the child. And so it was spontaneously a conception of a simple adoption, which was envisaged for same-sex couples. And yesterday we talked about the fa'amu child who are given to effeminate people, to mahu or homosexual people, and the court pronounces adoptions, simple adoptions, because they are asked for by Polynesians, in favor of people regardless of their sexual orientation. So I just wanted to finish by saying that this conception of parenthood allows to better understand the fact that it's possible to give a child to a homosexual couple, or at least the fears, the apprehensions were not the same as in metropolitan France. Thank you, Marie-Noëlle.
Merci, merci Marie-Noëlle.